Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be giving you my review of the Magic Item Compendium for D&D 3.5. Now I'm choosing this one because it's sort of an interesting case, at least for me personally, and it is something that is also available as a print-on-demand item through DM's Guild or Drive-Thru RPG. So if you're looking to get into 3.5 or you are into 3.5 already and you don't have this in your collection, like this is something that can be a very valuable asset to you at your gaming table. I say that, although I'm going to be honest here, as excited as I was for this book coming out, I can honestly say I never really used it that often. So it's one of those books. It's one of the best D&D third edition books that, I think is a fantastic book. I think it's a fantastic addition to your collection, but I just never really found use for it in my own personal games. And I'll sort of share like why that was a little bit later. And truthfully, it's not necessarily as bad looking at the book now as I felt it was back then. But truthfully, I probably still wouldn't be using this much even today. And I am running a 3.5 campaign as well as playing in a 3.5 campaign. So the Magic on Compendium is a collection that brings together most of the magic items or like weapon and armor properties, specific suits of armor and weapons and things like that as well, that released from the time after the core rulebooks came out till roughly around the time that this book was composed. Won't necessarily say when it was released because this book probably would have been, finished and sent off for publication, a few months before it actually hit the store shelves. But you've got a pretty decent assortment of stuff in here. So let's just take a look at the table of contents. And so what we have is armor, weapons, clothing, tools, magic item sets, using magic items by price, random treasure, and the record sheet. So this section here, particularly these two items, the clothing and tools, is one of the biggest reasons why I didn't bother with using this book too much. But before we get there, we will take a look at some of the stuff that is included. So we do have, all kinds of great new abilities for your weapons and your armor. And it's something that, it is definitely worth considering, especially like if you want to have a villainous NPC that just has this really unique equipment that the players don't necessarily have access to immediately. Then you can throw on some of these properties onto their armor or their weapons or give them some of these magic items and make them feel like really different from what you would find if you were just looking in the DMG, because you get like this really great array of abilities here that you can add on to like your armor, to your shields, to your weapons. I just think it's a really great addition, again, like I said, to the game. You even have some items here, some properties that you can add to your weapon that don't increase its effective plus, which doesn't necessarily mean like the actual plus like 1 or 2 that the item has to hit into damage, but what its effective is when you're adding on abilities. I'll go into that probably in another video, but the short version of it is when you're creating magic armor, weapons, or shields, you start with a masterwork item, and then you can add magical bonuses, which can take the form of either, well, they have to start, I think, at +1. I think any magic item has to be +1 before you can add any abilities onto it. But it can either be like additional pluses, so you could have a +2 weapon, so +2 to hit and damage, or you could have a +1 weapon with a +1 ability that might grant you a little bit more. Like, for example, a flaming longsword goes from +1 to effectively +2, although you're still only adding +1 to hit and damage, but you are adding an additional 1d6 fire damage on a successful hit. So you get a little bit more potential added damage versus like the accuracy of the to hit. And you can have weapons with an effective, or weapons, armor, and shields with an effective magical plus of up to +10, although only 5 of that can actually mathematically go towards the enhancement bonus of the item itself. I know it sounds kind of complicated, but it's not that bad once you wrap your head around it. And like I said, I'll do a video going into more detail and even show the process of creating a magic item using that. But with weapons, I think they all had like a plus bonus that you would apply to them. Whereas this one gives you just a few items or a few properties that only add a gold piece amount instead, meaning that they're always going to cost the same amount to add to your weapon, versus if they have a plus bonus, the higher the plus of your weapon is, the more expensive it gets to add anything to it. So I do wish there were more of them in here. I'm actually not seeing a whole ton of them, and I do know that there were other ones that were out there that simply aren't in this book, like the flaming and frost surge, or they had, I think it was like an electric surge as well, or a shocking surge in the DMG2, and those items were great because they allowed you to add plus 2d6 damage, but you can only use them a limited number of times per day. But they also just had a fixed gold piece cost, so it was so much easier to apply them without it kind of breaking, the economy, I guess. You give them some decent abilities, but they're limited, so, you can have a cheaper weapon with that. But still, it's kind of cool to see this stuff in here. We got our specific weapons, we got more weapons, and then we get into the clothing section. Now, the clothing section is, in the book, it's all alphabetical, but they do break them down by what body slot that they have. And this is actually a pretty useful way of, knowing what part of your character that they would go on. Although, most DMs, and myself included, will allow you to alter items to fit a different body slot if you really want to. But it's still kind of cool that they've got this huge section of clothing, which is nearly 100 pages. It started on page 64, I think it was, and it goes all the way into the 140s, I think, maybe even 150. Yeah, so 148. So you get a huge amount of new clothing items that you can add to it. And then you've got tools. So tools can be things like instead of your bag of holding, for example, in this book, if it were in here, would be considered a tool. Which, again, we'll go into a little bit why I don't use this book, and it sort of has to do a little bit with that. But yeah, you've got all these, like I said, all kinds of cool new abilities. You've got, what are these? The Dragon's Draught, which gives you breath weapons that you can do a little bit better than the the Elixir of Fire Breath, for example. Again, just some really cool items to add to your campaign, and it does include things like Essentia and the psionic stuff. So if you're into the Magic of Incarnum and the expanded Psionics Handbook, it has those items in here as well. And after we get into tools, then we get into the magic item sets, which again was sort of unique, I think, to this book here. We got Regalia of the Hero, which I think was an artifact, actually, wasn't it, or something along those lines? I'm not entirely sure, but again, you got some cool stuff. And then we've got using magic items, identifying them, and some other things along those lines before we get into the just the tables at the back of the book, which go into all the different weapon properties that are added in here. There's also some tables for if you want to roll random treasure, you can do so by their effective level, which again we'll talk about here sort of in a moment, but you do get a pretty good breakdown here, so you really could be using this at your table a hell of a lot more than I did. Like I said, I'm just going to be completely and totally honest here. But yeah, some really cool stuff in here. I mean, it's always great to have more options at your table. So the big question is, why didn't I use it? I don't even think I used it at all when I was running 3.5 back in the day, and I still haven't really used it today. So it's such a great book with so many cool things in it. The reason that I don't use it is because of the way that the book is organized and the way that the book is sort of laid out. And it's more just because I was far more comfortable with creating or using magic items and rolling magic items randomly from the DMG. So, for example, in the DMG, the way that magic items are organized is different. You still have weapons, armors, and shields, but instead of it being clothing to symbolize worn items and tools to represent other items, you had potions as a separate category. You would have rings as a separate category. You would have scrolls as a separate category. Wands, staffs, and rods were all their own separate categories. And then everything that was left, which was a lot of the clothing and a lot of the tools, were under the miscellaneous magic items section. So if we take a look inside the DMG here, you had a very simple table that was always the same to use for creating or for determining random magic items, right? And you would look at the treasure tables there for like layer treasures. It might be a bit further back. I can't remember exactly where it is, but there were tables that would tell you like how much gold, how many art objects, and then the potential for magic items if they were minor, medium, or major, and how many of each you would roll for. And then you would simply roll on this one small little table. Doesn't matter what the character's level is. Doesn't matter what the party's effective level is. You just always used this one chart. And truthfully, having it broken down by weapon and shields, armor and shields, weapons, potions, rings, rods, scrolls, staffs, wands, and then wondrous items, just worked really well. It was really simple, and this book changed that. Now, again, the actual way they decided to do this is a better kind of overall, because it gives you your weapons, it gives you your armor, but then, yeah, the clothing is worn objects, so you know that they're going to be taking up a body slot. So those will be your rings, your boots, your cloaks, things along those lines. But tools was also kind of a broad category, and they included things like, some of the other objects that would be in the miscellaneous, like universal solvent, or like the filter of love would be broken down instead of them being like a magic item or a wondrous item and say a potion. They would be just like in the tool section. So it was one of those things where I just didn't like wrapping my head around two different ways to organize magic items. I do think that they should have stuck to the DMG approach to make things a lot easier, because you could then simply just roll using the same tables, and you could just roll for like the random tables in here. Now, the tables in here for random like magic item generation are pretty good, because they do incorporate both the player's handbook, or not player's handbook, but the DMG and the Magic Item Compendium items in here as well. So you've got everything together, but you're looking through extra tables to find the right level, and I don't know. It was fine if it would have been the way that they had always done it, but you have to remember that this book came out in, I want to say 2006? 2007. So this came out in 2007. So 3.5 was already almost 4 years old. So we were already deeply entrenched in how we generated our magic items, only for it to be completely changed. Now, when 4th edition would come out, they would actually use a similar approach to this, but they would break things down even further. In the player's handbook is where they actually put the magic items in, because players would be using them more often than not. But they had them broken down. Instead of just simply clothing, they would actually have it by body slot. So in the 4th edition magic item tables, you would have things for arms or head or neck or, body. So they would work on that sort of premise instead. And it works fine if you're doing that from the beginning. But you had 4 years of a simple, easy to use, singular table that you reference anytime you roll for random magic items, versus needing to find and locate, the proper table for the proper level, and, make sure that you've got the right amount. And I don't know. I like this book in theory, but I just never really used it because of the execution. And again, it's a weird case of the organization being good, but it's just different enough that I felt it to be a little alienating back in the day. So I just always stuck to the DMG. And this one I never really ended up using. Even today, like, I'm playing in a 3.5 campaign as a player, so you would think it would be a lot more tempting to use the Magic Item Compendium. But for my, Scion character, I think I've got, 1 or 2 things from the Psionics Handbook, and everything else is just straight from the DMG. I guess it's just because that's my comfort zone. But yeah, the Magic Item Compendium is a great book. It's just different enough that at the time I just preferred to stick to what I had known because it's what I've been doing for, well, not even just 4 years, because 3.0 was the same way. So we're talking about 7 years of determining magic items one way that was easy and logical and sensical versus how it kind of broke down here. Like if I just wanted to add some scrolls to the treasure, it's harder to find them in here than it is in here, right? And that's kind of the problem. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the Magic Item Compendium. A fantastic book, just one that I never personally used. The other thing is, too, I just don't like to have a huge stack of books when I run my games. My current 3.5 campaign features only one player who played 3.5 before, so everybody else in the group is used to it. They either started with like 5th edition, or they started with like old school, basic expert, 1st, 2nd edition AD&D, and then kind of stepped away between 3rd and 4th and didn't come back until 5th. So I don't want to overwhelm with the options, so it's just the 3 core books. And for the players, it's just 3 books that they have access to. The Player's Handbook 1, the Player's Handbook 2, and the Spell Compendium to help them, with some spell casting if they so choose to use it. And I just want to have a small stack of books. When I'm actually in my 3.5 game that I'm playing it as a player, all props and all respect to the DM, because he uses all kinds of multiple stat blocks from multiple different sources, and I would shudder to do that personally, but he does it, and he does a great job with it. It's just for me, I just want one book. I just want to have one book open, or I want to write out the stats myself. Anyway, let me know in the comments below, what were your thoughts on the Magic Item Compendium? How often did you use it? As a DM, did you use it for random treasure? Or did you purposefully use it just to outfit your NPCs to introduce the items that way? And if you were a player, were you allowed to use this book when shopping for magic items in some of the larger cities? So let me know that in the comments below. Anyway, thank you all so very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.